Recording has started. Let me share my screen. Thank you. Thanks for everyone to join for the third session of this automation training. So before we start on the third session, so let's do a quick recap. And also we have thought through and then updated the agenda. Instead of the 4 sessions, I think we are planning to have additional one more session because the content which we wanted to cover in today, we thought we will cover both types of apps, Mule app and REST app covered today, but looks like the REST itself will take some more time. We'll cover a little bit of Mule and then the other Mule app development and deploying, that would be the one which would coming up on the Monday session. So which would be mainly for the developers who need to know how to build apps using the Anypoint Studio. But today we will cover how we will consume the apps which have already exists in our out of the box content so that we can see how we can use those and then how we can create the REST based connector and operations to create our own workflow. That's the agenda change in the agenda. We will be covering a little bit on the rest part today. And then to recap what we have done so far, these are the key components of the automation, mainly the applications where we create apps. Apps are two types, Mule app and REST app. And then instances are for REST apps where we will create instances for running where to run that particular app. So those are the instances. In REST app, we will configure the instances. For the Mule app, we configure the execution agent. We'll cover that later. So operations, as we discussed, two types of operations where you can create mainly the Mule connector one and the REST interface type. And then the rest of this stuff are similar. And then how do we build a workflow? We did walk through them. Mainly identify the prerequisites, and then you need to be clear on what are the things required for your workflow to be completed. You'll have to probably note down them, and then have them configured, have them created. For example, some of the things workflow input parameters would be required, mapping would be required. All those things we should be aware upfront so that you can plan and design a workflow. And after that, we will test the workflow and then we will trigger the workflow. So that's what part we covered in the day one. And then day two, we covered about the design elements, like the conditional gateway. So conditional gateway are to branch out to various options. So where you can configure based on the conditions, it will branch to multiple sections of the workflow. Multiple nodes can be configured there. So as we discussed earlier, we can have a number of evaluations. So you can consider it to be a branching, conditional branching for using the gateway component. And also we are seeing about the error boundary event. So error boundary event mainly to handle technical or business errors during the workflow execution. So the one which we saw, the XOR gateway or the gateway component, is after the completion of that particular successful completion of that particular step, you would do the branching. In case if that node itself that this file will not be able to complete because of error related to technical error or business error. So that time you need to have that branching configured. So those are the error boundary or error handling branching. Using this condition, you will be able to branch them out. We also saw those conditions and then branching in the day two when we did the configuration for those. So this is what we saw, the handling technical error in workflow execution. Executed on failure is where the error code boundary event would come in handy. So on success, we can configure the business validation in the error part itself. So where we can branch it out. This would be almost similar to what we have for the conditional part. On successful completion, you will be able to branch them out without having another gateway node created. You can branch them out with the on success to the various branching. So these are the options which we did look into while configuring the workflow. So we also saw about the script task, and also we did created a couple of out of the box workflows using this script task, where we did for manual, mainly for the incrementing the counter, mainly in case of user creation we did use. There are a couple of various other options, various other scenarios where we can use this script task, which currently supports the Groovy script. We should be able to build. This is mainly for the massaging the data. If you want to have some transformation built, and then massage the data from the output of one of the API call, and then that would massage the data in between using the script task, and then push that as a payload or input to the second subsequent API call. So those are the scenarios where a script task is mainly used. And we also saw a couple of assignments. And did want to check, are there anybody who did any of these assignments, got stuck, and then were not able to get through because various other reasons? Probably we can touch base at the last in case if there are any questions related to that, we will take them up. So let's not waste the time. So let's get to the session 3, what we are going to cover in session 3. So session 3, what we have planned is to talk about the various integrations. The main integrations, what we are talked about earlier, is the REST app or the Mule app. These are the two types of integrations possible in Serviceaide Luma automation module. So Serviceaide Luma can integrate with systems and microservices that may or may not support API. Means like API integration would always be through the REST, and then that is the phenomenal way where we can configure the options using the REST interface. Mainly the Mule, where we talked about are the interfaces or integrations using the non-REST. We do have REST-based integration also to make it handy, but in general, like the ones which we have done, like Active Directory, that is local Active Directory, where API support is not there. So where those, and then you connecting to the ODBC, connecting or running the PowerShell, running the SSH, those we don't have the ability to call through REST. Those are the scenarios where we covered with our out-of-the-box content also for performing the Mule operations. So those are the scenarios where we use the Mule app, and then scenarios where we use REST apps are the ones which we have RESTful APIs available. Let's talk about the what is the REST apps. So these are the custom apps that can integrate with system that supports REST protocol. So developers can configure the APIs to connect to the target, to retrieve data and perform an action. So those are the scenarios where we would use the apps. So here application, the endpoints to the third-party application, connectivity and authentication mechanism are configured at the application level. Instance where we configure the target environment for task execution, and operations where we have the workflow level operations and global operations. So the global operations are the ones which we configure at the integration level, and then when we pull that app into the canvas for building the workflow, you have the ability to copy the global operations and create your own operation, or you can even start new operation. You can build them on the fly while configuring the workflow itself. So there are both types of operations are possible in the REST app. So this is just a screenshot of how to configure the REST app. And then these are the connected apps where we go and create new app, you specify the app, and then it can configure instances and operations, which are similar to the Luma VA, which we have seen earlier. So let's not waste time. Let's take a look and then configure the app. Let me open up my system. So these are the, before that, I just want to walk through the apps which we have already here. So and then the operations which are available for that particular one. So let us take about I think we do have some REST operations. So where we talk about these are the REST one, and then you have the instances where you can configure and run them. And then you can go and create multiple instances and then configure the operation. And if you see the app definition here, you would have the name and then the integration type and then the information for that. So this is how you create a new app and then configure the system. So to show what are the things which we require to build an app, let me create a simple app for connecting to change gear. Uh, so let me go and create a new app. I will mention this as change gear. I also need some help on that. So I would put the details here. I'm going to use those details and then I'll put change gear. This is just a description information. We'll create an app. So once you create that app, you will need to create the instances first. So for that, creating an instances, what are required? So we'll create the name change gear, identifier come in. So URL is what we will configure. URL is the endpoint for that. I'll not put the entire endpoint because the rest of the authenticate user would show up in the operation part. I don't need anything else apart from the URL here. And then since the authorization, we wanted to pass the session ID for the subsequent call, I would configure it to no auth. And then global path parameter, nothing query parameter, nothing headers. I will add one header called session ID, which is required. And then I will configure a dollar variable for that for now. That's what I will configure. And then create this particular instance. So what we have done now is we created an app, we created an instance. So after creation of instance, you need to go and create the operation. So operation is the main call which needs to be done to perform certain action. So now I will go and create a operation to get the session ID. This is the first call which I'm going to do. So for that, I would need to pass the API key and then session authenticate user. This would be a post call, and then I would need to configure the payload. I don't require any specific header here. So here I have multiple options, but I'm to save the time. I will probably hard code the credentials here and then save this particular. Once I got the output, yeah, I need to specify the output part. So here I'll put session ID is what I wanted to capture. It is the text, and then extraction type is JSON path. And then how do I get that? Is session ID. This is how I will be able to store the value from this call. I would capture the session ID and then store them. So this is what I would be doing it in the first call where getting the session ID. So you have several options to pass this. You can put dollar variables here for the username and password, or like the new change in the implementation for instead of password, we will pass the API token. All those things can be passed from Luma VA directly to here. You don't need to have them created here or stored here as dollar variable. We can pass those from the Luma itself. So now we have created the session ID. Let me go and create another operation to create an incident request. I'm going to do a simple create incident request. And then for this URI, I'm passing incident request, and it would be a post call. And then I will add the input which is required is the session ID, and then data type is text here, and then validation type. And we would need header for this. Let me add that header. And then the payload. So these are the information. I'm just hard coding. Later we can have this dollar variables and then pass them through the Luma VA. So we will pass all those information while passing the while triggering this particular workflow where we can map those things. We can expose this as input parameters and then have them exposed as mappings from Luma VA or change here itself. So those things would be possible. Currently, to show how it would work, I'm just hard coding certain options here. And then what would be required is I just wanted to show the ID, which is the output for this particular event. Extractor type again is JSON path here, and then $ID is the value where we will pass. So now I've done two operations, the creation of there are validation messages which are required. So I've created two operations for this particular flow. So I have this app created. So now if I go to a particular workflow, create a workflow, let me go and create a new workflow. So this is create incident in change care. First in care, then I'm going to create them. So I have the canvas available. So I have this change here, which I just created the app. So it shows up here, and then I can just drag and drop that over here. So here I'm configuring it as get session ID. And then instance, it will always come directly. I can put. So here, this is what two options which we were talking about earlier. Copy from global operation because I've already defined them in the global operation. I will do that. Then I'll get the session ID. That's the first thing which I would need. And then inputs. So I'll go and add the input which is required. No, session ID doesn't require any input because we are passing that hard-coded value. Else we would need the inputs which are required for that. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to add one more operation, which is my create request. So here also I'll specify the change here, copy from global operation name is create incident request. So here if you see the input, which is already came in, input required, I'll specify the direct mapping, source type would be workflow input parameter, and then, okay, I need to define the input parameter, go back, create workflow input parameter, ID, text. I'll just put some message here. Then.
So Prashna, the session ID doesn't need to be a workflow input, right? You can get it from the previous step.
Yeah. We can
Step
do
output.
that also. Yeah. Okay, let us do that. Okay, let us not require any input. We go back to this create incident request where we have configured the input session ID. So input required, so it would be step output parameter. I can specify get session ID, output parameter is my session ID. So this is the other way where we can specify the inputs to the flow. So now I have configured the inputs, and then the output of that session ID shows up. And then let me go and do an end call to this. The start event and then end event. Let me join them. So this is my step. Let's get session ID, which is showing red. Yeah. Let me save this particular workflow. So this workflow is saved now. So we'll be able to see that workflow. Let me go back to the list of workflow. So this is the workflow which we wanted to test. Let me go and run them. So there's no input required. So this is the step which got triggered. Session ID, then is okay, session ID failed. So this is the actual call it went trace log.
Some issue with the environment is hopefully all components are running. It looks like it's not able to post a message.
Right.
In the ActiveMQ.
Okay.
Scroll down. External service integration requests out.
This is this error from our side or?
Yeah, this is from, I think, gateway may not be really up and running. So Saurabh, can you quickly check if integration gateway is up and running? I think we were testing with.
Yeah, so okay. Maybe using the new version of integration gateway. Let me put the older one back. Kishore, give me a minute.
Okay.
Okay, okay.
Can you check the user password for the change instance?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that should be fine because we just validated it. Let me try doing that from the Postman. Also, we should be able to get that if it is working. Yeah, we were able to get through from the Postman. So I think some issue with the automation. I think it should be getting soon. So while we are troubleshooting this, let me walk through the other part of the integrations where we wanted to cover. So mainly this is how you would go and build new REST app and then configure the operations and then use them in the workflows. So apart from that, we would also wanted to check on the get on them. Let's not get on the Mule apps. It would take a little bit of this one. So we also wanted to check on the other integration, other options over here. We wanted to showcase on executions, historical execution, where we would see that issue. Yeah, this is how you can see. Okay, let's come back. We'll continue with the Mule one, and then we'll come back to this rest there. So let me go through the PPT slide again to walk through the Mule part of it. So the other type of apps are the MuleSoft apps, which are reusable extensions that enable to integrate with third-party system. Which may not support direct REST or HTTP connection. So in those scenarios where we wanted to use the Mule mainly or Active Directory, AWS, where even though AWS supports the API one, but it would require a lot of pre and post calls to perform certain actions. So in those scenarios, we would use the AWS connector from the Mule and then reuse them to send here. Similarly, SAP, Salesforce, SFTP, SSH, these doesn't have the HTTP support. So in those are the scenarios where we would concentrate on getting through Mule. So basically why we would push to why we use to Mule was provides reusability. So we can create the apps, Mule apps, and then reduce code complexity. We can have them configured at one place, makes code maintenance easier. And mainly it would have lot of connectors available. So that is the major reason why we wanted to go with Mule because Mule has got vast list of repository of connectors. So where we can create those as app and then make the workflow easier to flow. So connect systems without knowing technical details required to execute a task in the system. So for this Mule app, to create Mule app, we would require to go through Anypoint Studio. That is the IDE for designing and testing the Mule apps with the discrete operations. So this is what we wanted to cover in detail on the next session. How do we use the Anypoint Studio a little bit, and then how to create discrete operations to create the app and then operations to use them in the workflow. So these are the elements for building
Prasanna,
the
sorry
Mule.
to interrupt
Yeah.
before you. Yeah, so it should work now. Just in case if you want to go back to that, that should work.
Okay, okay. I think let me cover this part, the Mule one, and then we'll go back to that. Okay, so these are the main elements to build the Mule app. So to build the mule app with discrete operations, you would need anytime studio, anypoint studio. I think with the typo there. And then import app. So configure operations using discrete operation in endpoint. So you will have to perform the import the apps which we have built in Anypoint Studio, and then configure operations. So that is the manual task. We would have to configure the operations using the discrete operation endpoint. So these two are the elements which is currently, if you're using out of the box component. So these two are done when we provision any new tenant. So what is required to consume the Mule apps would be the configure connection information. So this is the first thing which we need to do, because all this Mule soft configuration, if the connection point or the instance details and the credentials are part of this service configuration. So you need to go and configure the service configuration to get the Mule connection configured properly. And then you also need to deploy the app in the execution agent. So currently you have cloud agent, you can have on-premise agent, which we'll talk in the later session. So where you can deploy those apps on those particular agents and then make it work. And then once these are done, then only you will be able to use those operations in the workflow as service task. So these are the 5 steps which we need to follow while configuring the Mule app. So I think these are the different out of the box Mule apps and operations which we have, which would be coming up. I think Windows Active Directory using the WinRM, which we have PowerShell and WinRM. We are using this. So there are various options available. You could see them in the list. We have AWS EC2, AWS S3 to mainly copy files and then have them stored. Azure to create instance, mainly infrastructure related Azure activity. We can do that using that. And to test one of this one, Helios and SMS. So these are the 4, 5 which you see now are the currently out of the box. Soon we would be adding additional out of the box content for Mule app and operations. So let's get to the previous one and then see if we're able to get the option running. Let me go back to this create incident in change care and then see execute and view. Oh, it went fine. So I got the session ID. This is the first call which we did. And then you got the complete this one session ID is there, and then you can go to the third step and then use that session ID. So we have used the session ID, you could see here, and then created the ticket, and then this is the ID which we got. So 135 ticket got created in the change care demo environment. So that's how you would build the incident, build the various operations in that, and then consume them. The session ID would be the one which would need to be there for each and every operation prior to performing the actual operation. Like it might be create incident, update incident, and rest of the other operations can be used using that. So any questions so far in building the operations and REST app, consuming the REST app?
No, you change your parameters in the operation, the get session ID for after is failing?
No. The failing was due to the other, I think, because this is still in a QA environment. So there was a new integration services which they had. So they are pointed to that, and then that was the reason for failure. So there is no change in the option or in the integration. Let me show you that in the workflow. So this is a get session ID, and then these are the inputs operation. So it's still the same. I didn't change anything. So
Okay.
it's the same call, which it went fine because of the integration services which we use to connect to the external system. So that module got updated because it's still in QA environment. You'd have those issues.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So that's how you will be able to build the operations and then consume. That's how you will extend the operations or the connector apps in the workflow. The second part, which we just covered, the Mule part, which I wanted to showcase. So even in Mule, even though you might not need to build in case if there is any complex need or any integration which don't have support to perform certain actions, like REST APIs are not there. So if you want to integrate with those, and then those connectors are available like SAP, Salesforce. So those are the things which would go through the Mule part. But rest of the other options, like for example, we already have an extensible Active Directory using connector using the Mule. We can use those of the Active Directory also and expand them to perform new operations. So that is the reason the operations which we have built is extensible in the sense like what we have done. Let me show you what we have done in case of the Active Directory. So Active Directory, if you see any of the operation, so you would see the actual PowerShell command is what we are passing through. Rest of the required stuff to run that PowerShell in the system is already built into the Mule adapter. So if I want to get extension to any of the operation, we will be able to build them. Same thing, let me show you how to build one of the simple one. I just copied to create one. So generally what you require in case if you want to perform any of this activity, currently we don't have any operation to search based on the input you provide. So what you would do is you will go to the create operation. So in that operation, you can do search user and then it will automatically come in. So this will automatically come in, execute command. You don't require content would be what you would do is text applying. So, and then we would put, this is the command which I wanted to execute. So what I'm doing here is I'm just searching with the name like whatever I provide. So I'm not too sure about the SAM account name completely, which I'm not aware. So I would be able to perform search. Currently, I'm just using the name attribute, like somebody provides an email only. So I will be able to get that input, search from the email and then get the SAM account name. Because to perform all the other Active Directory related operations, you would need SAM account name, which is the one which would be required. And then if you ask anybody, end users will not know what is their SAM account name in general. So they would know their email address or their login name. So we can probably use one of those to perform search before performing the actual Active Directory operation. So this is how you would be able to extend the operation, existing operation with that. So STD. I'm just creating a standard output to perform. So extraction type is again my JSON. This would be and save this operation. So this would require an input. I'll just add an input to this. just created a new operation called search operation, and then this the file it would run. I'm not currently not bothered about the output. We can just consume that and then see. Let me go to the workflow builder, create a new workflow, search user in AD, create. Start. Just going to the Active Directory one. So here I would put search user, then cloud, then operation. Search user, then inputs, have the SAM account name. So let me go to the workflow first before this workflow input. Need an input, SAM account name, text. Message throws. Name is again SAM account name, field type is text. So I'm going back to search user here, map this direct mapping, workflow input parameter. SAM account name. Operation, I'll just validate once the operation, then just save this. Okay, sorry. And then I need to add an endpoint to this. Then you'll have the connection to this and then save this particular workflow. Okay, so let me quickly run this workflow and then show you how we can use this. So I'll just put in. Okay, so this is how we will be able to trace log. If you see the so these are the details of my given name, all those details came in. So that's how you will be able to perform the search prior to that. And this is not just for search, I'm just using. I think if you see there are umpteen number of PowerShell commands which would be possible using the PowerShell one. I think that if you go and Google it out, you would get most of the operations which we require for Active Directory. Most of the management of Active Directory systems can be done through PowerShell. Then there is a huge list of PowerShell commands available in the Google. In most of the sites, you will be able to perform. And then what we are doing is simple PowerShell execution of those from command line, from the execution while performing through the operation. So if you see those operations here, that's what I was talking about, the extensible way of building this connector. Same thing, similar options which we are used even with the Azure also. If you see the Azure also, where we have the similar, we have Azure in a module, PowerShell module. Using that PowerShell module, we are performing all these activities. So you can extend them, not just limited to the operations which we provide as the out-of-the-box content. You can do additional operations and then make it work. You don't require to go to any point studio. You don't require to go to MuleSoft to build, publish, and then come to the workflow to create the workflows. So that is the other advantage which you can start using them in the system. Any questions so far? Kishore, anything you want to cover, additional stuff which I've missed through some of this stuff? Kishore, Sneha, anybody?
Okay. I already put some question in the chat, but it's possible to show how change can call automation workflow, the other side.
Joe, I think we have shared the automation APIs using which you can call the trigger the workflow. So I'll share those APIs.
Okay, and this
in
call
the
is
chat.
from the some automation in the change grid workflow, right?
Well, Jose, to be clear, we have not done the level of integration of automation into change gear that you've seen with Luma. So that's something we're starting to work on. So it is possible, of course, to call an API out of change gear, and Sheila can probably talk to that. But basically, it's calling an automation workflow is no different than change gear calling any other API at this point, until we have this integration where you can do the mapping of change gear, data into automation and see the workflows inside of change gear. But today it's just an API call, right? There's
Okay.
nothing more than that.
That is my question. If you have some example to make this call, this kind of call. I know that it's not prepared for that, but only for to be clear that how can call automation workflow. That's okay. I understand. Thank you.
Right.
Right.
I mean, again,
So currently you can do it through Luma.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, change gear right now, or POB, or any other application, SAP, Workday could call one of our automations. You would just have to call the API that's out there for the automation.
Okay.
Prasanna, Ken has just asked a question on using a global operation or updating a global operation and that having an effect on the workflow. So I wanted to answer this. Ken, as we said, that there are two type of operations. One, workflow level operations that are created while on the fly when the workflow is being created, and the other way is copying over the global operations. So when you copy the global operation in your workflow, it creates a reference. It is just a copy. So if you change the operation on the integrations page, it will not have an impact on the on the workflows that use a copy of those operations. And this is true for REST operation, not for the Mule operation. If it is a Mule app operation from for the Mule app, the change on the integrations page will affect all the workflows, but for REST, it will not have an impact because the workflows are using a copy of that.
I don't think for Mule operation, you won't get that option.
Yes, because for Mule, when we are using a Mule operation, we cannot copy. We cannot edit the operation
Global
in the
operations.
workflow. Yeah,
That's right. That's right. So you won't have that option of copy and to create them. So it will always be create new operation for Mule. using the Mule app.
So Sneha, if that's the case, it seems like we need a search capability to find out what workflows include what REST operations. Because if I come in and change, make a mistake or something, or add a new parameter or whatever to the default, now
That
I've
will
got to
not
go back
impact.
to every single workflow and update that workflow with that new change. Is that correct?
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ken.
Hmm.
Let's put that on the backlog.
Right. But if those are working fine, you won't touch them generally.
We'll have to look into this, Ken, because when we copy an operation, there are a number of other mappings that we do, and changing the global operation. If we pass on that change to the workflows, there are chances that a workflow that is working might
Might get-
break. So this is the reason why it has been kept separate for now. We'll have to think this through and see that how we can stop the existing working workflows from breaking in such a case, or provide a easier way for the workflow developer to find out which all workflows will get impacted or will require changes if we have to update a global operation.
But
I-
it's
I'm
just an
just thinking-
impact of change analysis,
Yeah.
basically.
Yes.
At very least, you need to see what's using what, so that if you need to make a change or going to make a change, you know where to make the changes.
That's
I'm
right.
just thinking back to Luma. If you don't override a integration call, you'll get whatever changes made at the integration level.
You're right. Yeah.
Right.
And once you override it, all bets are off, of course. But I've got another question on variables. So if you've got a workflow that's got bunches of steps in it, and your first step has an output variable, is that output variable available to each successive step as an input? Again, I'm going back to Luma, where we have global variables and local variables, and just trying to understand how long that variable is valid.
So
Yes,
the
I'll
output,
take that.
yeah. So the
Sneha, go
output
ahead.
variable of a step is available throughout the workflow. You just have to refer it using the correct activity ID.
Okay.
So there's no concept of local variable, Ken, to your point. So it is so once a variable is defined and the value is set, it will be available for the whole lifetime of the workflow unless the value is reset. So once the step is set a output variable, so you can use that output variable in all the subsequent steps.
So if I use the same output variable name in different steps, it's really a different variable because it includes the step name.
Exactly. So you have out underscore step ID, right? So that makes it unique across the steps.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, then if there are no questions, then thank you. Thanks for your time. We will connect on Monday. Then we'll go through the MuleSoft related.
Okay, thank you.